Hello there! Welcome to WriterLens. Today we are going to be talking about the epic film Inception. Now, Inception is a complicated story filled with all kinds of world building, big ideas, but at the heart of it, even amongst all of this chaos and complicatedness, you really have a heist story, and that is one reason why it is so successful. But often, when people think about works like Inception in terms of thinking about it for their own writing, what they want to know is how can I copy what Christopher Nolan was able to do? Because when I try to make a complicated world, when I try to have a lot of world building, I just end up overwhelming my audience. How can you avoid that? So, today I am going to talk about 3 tips for writing exposition because Inception does it extremely well, and all writers can learn tips from this wonderful movie. Tip number 1, make the
Hey,
character learn along with us.
hey Daniel,
Yeah?
I don't see you or
Oh, sorry.
anything. I just see a black screen.
Sorry. Hold on. They see me on YouTube, but they don't see me here. You don't?
No, I just see a black
But
screen.
I see me, and they see me on YouTube. It's very strange. It's on your end, Beth.
Okay. I'll just follow along in my head. I have a vivid imagination.
All right, no worries. Okay, so for those of you on YouTube out there, all right. Tip number 1, make the character learn along with us. So, this work, like a lot of great works, has a character learning along with the audience. We have a viewpoint character in Inception where they do not know what is going on. So, for example, Harry Potter. Harry Potter, he comes in and he's an orphan. He doesn't know very much about the magical world. And so, as he goes through the magical world, he has to learn those pieces of information. He has to learn, what's a muggle and who's Dumbledore and all of these things. And he has to learn all of that exposition, these extra pieces of information that make the story work. But because he is not aware of this going in, he can act as our little avatar and he can learn from Hagrid and from Dumbledore and from the other characters about the wizarding world. So it's all very natural. And you'll notice the way J.K. Rowling puts out the exposition, it's very much in the moment, what he needs in order to accomplish his goal right then in that moment. We have the same thing in Inception because Cobb ends up bringing in Ariadne, who is the architect of the dream that they're going to create. And she is not familiar with this world. This brand new to it, just like us. And so he has to give her all of those rules as well. He has to explain, this is how dreams are created. This is why all those people are looking at you uh, and don't use memories from your own self or you'll start to forget what reality is, things like that. So because the character has to have it explained, it makes it feel more natural. And again, like I said with Harry Potter, what Christopher Nolan does well is he presents the information as it's necessary to move the story forward. We don't just sit down and get in one lump scene, these are all the rules about people that want to extract from dreams. It is a much more complicated system than that. And rather than try to give you all of those rules and overwhelm you as a learner, he acts almost like a professor, where you start a few introductory lines, a few introductory themes, and then it gets more complicated and more nuanced as the audience can keep up with it. But you'll notice what also happens is very early on, we have explosions and excitement, right? So they're sitting there at that French cafe, which we'll talk about that scene in a moment. And you have this dramatic shift of explosions and things flying around and cars and all this craziness. And we see it for ourselves what kind of crazy things that can happen in this world. We don't just have it explained to us, it happens at the same time, which is tip number 2, exposition as revelation. And that just means that rather than tell the audience something that happened like maybe in the past or just tell them kind of a basic rule, it's better to just show them and demonstrate how that works and have the character come to the realization at the same time as the audience. The Inception does this really well with the concept of the kick. It shows you Leonardo DiCaprio's character Cobb, plunging into the bathtub, and it's like pow, it's a pow moment. And we get the idea that you need that pow moment in order to wake from a dream. Later, it's going to be explained more. But the fact that it gives it to us, it just demonstrates it rather than just presents it to us as an abstract concept, not only makes it easier to understand, but it makes it much more engaging to watch. Star Wars, has that classic opening scene where you see the power of the Empire versus the power of the rebels. They have that little ship. The Empire has this huge ship. Just in that opening image, you're like, whoa, they're outnumbered. They're outgunned. They're the underdogs. It's exposition given through visual that's very effective. And this really gets to the age-old advice of show, don't tell. It's always better to the audience that rather than just give a summary of something, you give a demonstration of something. Well, I shouldn't say it's always, it's often the case, more often than not. Now, what Inception has to do, just because it is rather complicated, is give a little bit of that summary, but then it takes longer with the demonstration. So it gives you that high-end detail just so you can understand, okay, yeah, we're in a dream, and these are kind of the rules, and then it just shows you what that means. A good example of that is the paradoxical staircase, where he shows the staircase going around in circles, and he's like, well, in a dream, you can have a situation where it looks like you're just going around in circles and there's really a dimensional gap and things like that. All right, and finally, number 3 is lead with action, not exposition. We have all seen this, especially with new writers, where you'll open up a book and they've told you their hook and it's really exciting. And then you sit down to read their work and the first page is just information. It's not characters, it's not drama, it's not tension, it's just data. And that's not very interesting to read. Let's be honest. And again, Inception does this very well because it really throws us into a completely disorienting scene. The first time you see the movie, you're just like struggling to even figure out what in the world is going on because you have them in the middle of a dream and they're trying to extract information and it goes wrong and there's action and excitement and suspense and all of this is going on as you're getting the information of the way that this world works, that this is a world where people can get into dreams somehow and get information somehow. And so you can kind of piece together a little bit of what's going on. But it's going to go back and it's going to explain a lot of the buildup to this. Not only does it start with a scene that happens towards the end of the movie, which is even more disorienting, but like I said, it starts with a big action sequence that almost assumes you kind of know what's going on. And so it makes you just have to rush to catch up. But the other thing that it does is it creates that action because this movie does have a lot of great set pieces of, action, and the whole like last hour of this movie is more or less nonstop action, but there's going to be a long pause where they have to set up the heist, where they have to set up all these rules. And so to promise to the audience, hey, this is going to be worth it. We're going to pay this off because it's going to become really super exciting. They have an exciting scene at the beginning. And then, as I said, even when you're learning about how dreams work, they're still showing you. You're still getting demonstrations. It's not just sitting down in a conference room. You're actually in dreams. There's tension going on within the dreams. And of course, there's a lot of character tension as well. So those are some tips that you can get out of Inception. Let's take a deep dive into the story structure. So, you know me, I love my 7-point story structure. So we have the hook of Inception, which is Cobb is able to interact with people inside a dreamscape. And you also know that Cobb is somebody who is wants to reunite with his children, right? He is wanted. He doesn't. He has to be a vagabond in society. So the question really is will Cobb reunite with his kids? Will he be able to get back to something like normalcy? And this is a great hook for a story like this because it really speaks to something that everyone can relate to. It's a relationship story. This really is a love story in terms of the driving force of Cobb's character. And so, like I said, it makes it very relatable. So even though you have all this high level sci-fi actiony stuff, right? You also have at its heart a basic human want that is clear to the audience, and we can track it because we can see as he ends up doing this mission, as the mission goes better, well, his chance of getting back with his kids is going better. So we can watch it. I talk about the tracking bar often. You can watch that tracking bar happen in real time. So the decision, of course, is when Cobb decides to try to accomplish Inception because he is promised this is a way to get back to his kids. And in his mind, his hands are tied. This is about the only way he's going to be able to do it. And why not give it a go? Otherwise, it wouldn't be a movie, right? So we have the fun and games, which is the setup to the heist, and all of that craziness, which you probably have realized the pacing of this movie is a little bit different. The pacing of this story does have a lot in that center. There's the decision, and then it's a lot of doing stuff and the heist and all of that. And then a fairly long third act as well. That first act is pretty short. Or I guess if you think of it not starting, it depends on where you put the act break, right? If you put the act break at the heist, then the first act is really long. So, the pit, Cobb is trapped inside the dreamscape of his life. It just keeps getting worse and worse and worse. The stakes get raised, and I'm going to show later when we go through the script how Christopher Nolan does it so well, because we first have the stakes of he's just got to accomplish it because that's his only chance to be with his kids, and he sets up the idea that when Cobb is going to when the plane lands, they're on a plane in a dream state, and when the plane lands, well, if he hasn't done this, then he's going to jail or who knows what, some sort of maximum security prison or something, it sounds like, or maybe killed. So he has a huge amount of stakes there, and then they just keep going up and up and up and up. It's crazy. So finally, the climbing out, Cobb reunites with Sato, and together they leave the dream space. And in the new world, Cobb reunites with his children in the real world. Or maybe it's not. Along the way, the story plays with whether or not the entire world is somehow fictitious, because the whole point of it is when you start meddling around with, what is real, what is not, with reality, you will have a tendency to lose a sense of reality. So this ending, which is a terrific ending, and I'll talk about it a little bit later as well, is a great new world because you have them accomplishing their goal, but yet they haven't sold out that fun nugget of an idea of questioning reality. You still have that. Christopher Nolan gives that to you to think about. All right, when it comes to characters, it might be a surprise to know that Christopher Nolan actually does adopt the 8 characters fairly strictly. It's not as on the nose as something like Star Wars, where the archetypes are maybe as obvious, but they're certainly here. And again, I think it's one reason why this film is so successful despite the density of the material, because we have characters with all of the worldviews represented. So you have Cobb, the protagonist. Really, his antagonist is his wife, who's essentially a shadow version of himself. So that's kind of interesting. This is when I often get asked, can the antagonist be the protagonist? Can you be your own antagonist? And I say generally, no, it's not a good idea. How Christopher Nolan pulls this off is he does have a character representative of that attitude that Cobb has. So Mal is actually personified, so that makes her own character and it works. And then you have Sato, who's the distraction character, who is encouraging Cobb to go into Inception and try all these things, which really, from a moral standpoint, he really shouldn't be doing, considering his own mental state. He really should be distancing himself from it. And that's Ariadne, the relationship character, is telling him and has conversations with him about, you got to distance yourself from this. Why aren't you telling your team about your mental state? All of these things. And then we have the team with the different characters. We have a support character who's Yusef, who's basically just along for the ride. He's very compliant. Then we have our opposition character there, who is always kind of doubting what is going on. Then we have our reason character who's always trying to explain things. And then, really, in my opinion, the target, Fisher, who they're trying to target, is really the emotion character in terms of his reaction to the elements of the world. But you could look at it different ways. But certainly, you can make a case for him getting all those different worldviews represented. So the opening scene, like I said, actually flashes to the end of the movie, where you see this elderly Japanese man, and he says, "It belonged to a man I met in a half-remembered dream," and then it cuts to a flashback of where we're at. So it's very complex, because here we have the movie actually begins in limbo, which is many dream degrees down from, but in the future, from a scene that's also in somebody's dream. So when you actually have to parse it out, it's a complicated place to put the audience right from the get-go, which is one reason why I think it is so distracting. It's a very distracting thing to do to the audience, to throw them in the middle of all that. But it works, like I said, partly because it's action focused. We even if we can't understand it, we certainly have a sense of there's a mission to be done and they're trying to get a mission accomplished. And so with all of that, it ends up working out pretty well. So we have a little bit of an explanation of the dream state here. So Cobb is talking an idea taking hold in the brain. It's almost impossible to eradicate. A person can cover it up, ignore it, but it stays there. And so this is really what the theme of this movie is going to be about. It's about the things that can get into our head, that can take over, create its own reality, make us question our own reality. So getting it up early, a thematic statement, very, very smart. And then Arthur brings up the exposition. It's called extraction, to get thoughts from somebody else. And then Cobb says, we can train your subconscious to defend itself from even the most skilled extractor. So we're getting this little bit of information about the world building. And then they're going to pull the twist that rather than just tell us about what extraction looks like, you're going to find out we're in the middle of an extraction right now. And of course, that's a way to amp it up and make things much more interesting. So you have Cobb saying, I am the most skilled extractor. I know how to search your mind. So he just kind of spells out what his character does. And like I said, this works out well because even though this is a fair amount of exposition, it's going to immediately pivot from this is what happens and now let's do it. Because the audience is going to be like, wow, that's kind of cool. People can go into people's minds. I wonder what that looks like. And then you figure out, oh, wait, we are in the middle of that. We're seeing it right now. So it's a fun little twist on us. All right. So later, after that mission doesn't go very well, which is an interesting concept too, to start your characters with a failure means they have somewhere to go, right? Obviously, if everything worked out perfectly from the beginning, you wouldn't get any growth for Cobb or the other people. The other thing too is they're only going to get one shot at the big heist at the end of the story to do Inception. So the fact that they start with a failure does give you that fail that you need. Otherwise, it just seems too easy if on the first try they do it. So they've tried once something else and failed, and then moved on to something similar and are successful. Not to mention, I mean, Christopher Nolan makes it very complicated for them to pull it off. There are little fails along the way. So the big thing that Saito wants is Inception. Is it possible? And then Arthur, our opposition character, is like, of course not. Nope, can't be done. And that is going to be his role throughout the story. He will be the character that's like, nope, never going to happen. Nope, I'm Mr. Skeptical. And you need characters like that because it raises the stakes for the audience. So he goes on and he explains how it's very complicated to make somebody think something is from their own mind versus still knowing it came from somewhere else. So ultimately, what they're trying to do is something very basic, really. They're just trying to get someone to think that they should break up their father's company. So again, I talked about the children being a motivating factor. That's very basic, easy to track. The idea that, well, they just have to convince somebody to break up their company, that's easy to track. So for those in the audience that maybe aren't quite following all of the little nuances of how this actually is happening, you can at least have an idea of what is happening, even if you don't quite get the how. And other people can explain. And I show here, Arthur is very, very uh, against any of this. You know, he's just constantly fighting back. This can't be done. You don't know that. You know, and things like that. And even when Cobb's like, "No, I've done it before," and then Cobb won't answer who he's done it before, which is obviously a fun mystery to set up to the audience. The way that Mal's story is given to the audience is just in little pieces, and it makes it a mystery rather than start out the story and say, well, you know, Cobb was loved to experiment with his wife in these dream states, and they went so deep that they lost sense of reality. So he had to plant an idea in her mind that the reality wasn't real, and so when they came back from their dream state, well, his wife still doubted if it was reality and she committed suicide. Like, you could have started the story like that, but that'd be really boring. Not to mention, it makes a nice mystery as well, as not just boring us with all that information up front. And because nobody else knows the story, they act as audience members, right? Only Cobb knows this secret. So everyone else doesn't really understand. So they uh so when he has to explain any elements of it, and he's kind of vague about it, but when he has to explain other elements, it makes sense because they don't know. All right, so he gets his conversation with Miles. Miles is a bit of the relationship character at front before it turns into Ariadne, and that's actually his cousin, I think, or something like that, related. Anyway, they're related, which is a good way of kind of tossing off the relationship character role to somebody else. And here you get the idea, some exposition just brought in. You taught me how to navigate other people's minds. So you figure out from this conversation that Miles was the one that kind of invented this whole thing. Even though he says, I never taught you to be a thief. And he says, Miles says, you should just design the dreams yourself. And Cobb says, Mal won't let me. And then Miles says, come back to reality, Dom, please. And that is ultimately what the relationship character is going to tell him. It's just going to shift to Ariadne. All right, so we move on to Ariadne, and the first thing that he has to do is recruit her by saying, you know, let me describe well, he can't describe the job. He wants to know if he can do it. And he says, you have 2 minutes to draw a maze that takes me 1 minute to solve. So she has to sit there and do it. And that's such a fun scene because there'd be so many ways to demonstrate whether or not this person was capable of the abstract reasoning to create a dream. But instead, we just get to see it, right? Show, don't tell. Works really well. So here we have an exposition scene where they're sitting at that French cafe. And again, these are scenes that are very difficult to write and make interesting because you just have two people sitting down, looking at each other. So Cobb saying, we only use a fraction of the true potential of our brains. When we dream, the mind performs wonder. And then he talks about your imagination flies. And Ariadne says, I'm discovering it. And Cobb says, exactly. genuine inspiration. He's kind of painting this beautiful picture. But then he pulls the rug out from underneath us and explains, well, I'm not just talking about it, I'm showing you. We are actually in a dream right now. Very, very clever. Now, one thing that's interesting about when you look at the script versus you look at the movie is you can see that the actors did a lot to make the dialogue feel a little more natural, a little more fluid. So, like what I have here is the shooting script, and then I'm going to superimpose the actual dialogue from the movie. So you can see how it changes, instead of how did we end up at this restaurant, he says, how did we end up here? And she says, we came here from, and he says, think about it, Ariadne, how'd you get here? Which was not the original line, probably to get that name out again for the audience. And then I like this where they flipped it around. So she says in the original script, oh my God, we're dreaming. And he says, stay calm. We're actually asleep in the workshop. This is your first lesson in shared dreaming, remember? And how it ends up being is we're dreaming, like she doesn't actually know. And then he says, you're actually in the middle of a workshop right now sleeping. This is your first lesson in shared dreaming. Stay calm. So to flip that stay calm towards the end alerts the audience that there's something about to go down. And of course, then everything starts violently fragmenting, as it says. Woo, excuse me. So we then get the exposition of the subconscious within your dreams. If you start messing around with it too much, they'll start turning on you. They'll see you as an invader, right? And again, instead of simply telling you about it, it's doing it in real time. So they're asking the question as it's unfolding, which is making it much more interesting to watch. And here, Cobb says, never recreate places from your own memory because that is what Ariadne did. And he says, nope, don't do that because building a dream from your memory is the easiest way to lose your grasp on what's real and what's a dream. And then, of course, she asks the obvious question. Well, did that happen to you? How do you know so much about it? And then he switches the topic. But of course, to the audience, it's like, well, yeah, that somebody hit the nail right on the head, right? So it makes the character much more interesting. So in the middle of this exposition scene, it's actually telling us a little bit about his character as well. And that's a great thing to remember. If you can throw in pieces of information that are necessary to understand the story in a way that also reveals character, much more interesting to witness. And of course, in real time. So he's really doing three things at the same time. And here we have the totem getting introduced. Like I said, it is just concept after concept after concept that Christopher Nolan has to throw in. And so if you really tried to throw in all of this magic system, all of this world building at the beginning, it would just squash it, which unfortunately I see a lot of writers try to do. They're like, well, if I don't do it, the people are going to be confused. And I think this work shows that it's okay. The audience can be a little confused, provided that they have that motivating factor that is clear. And because we clearly can understand this guy needs to do a mission to get back with his kids, and the mission involves making somebody think something, the specifics of it, we'll figure it out. We can track that and we can track if it's going well or not based on their actions, and we'll figure out the little pieces, and it's fun to piece together. Now, granted, this isn't going to work in every genre, but for sci-fi speculative fiction audiences, they're willing to go along for the ride. So don't be afraid to challenge your audience a little bit. But remember, keep those motivations clear because that is what's pulling us through the story. The logistics and the world building is fun and it's beautiful imagery and it's fun to play with, but it's that, I really want this guy back to his kids. I want him to figure out a sense of reality. I want him to have peace with his life. That's what's motivating me in the story right now. And so you need to have that up front. That's the kind of exposition you need early on for sure. So here we bring on Eames, who is the reason character. So he's about just the nuts and bolts of how to make it work. And so Cobb goes to him to try to figure out how to do Inception. And And he says that he's kind of tried to do it, but he got the idea in place, but it didn't take. And he said the problem was you need the simplest version of an idea, the one that will grow naturally in the subject's mind, subtle art. So he shows the difficulty of it. And again, it gives you another bit of a failure, right? Because you have Cobb says he's done it, but there's something weird about it. Now you have Eames saying he's tried to do it and he failed. And then you had them try to extract a memory at the beginning and failed. So you have a lot of sense that this could go wrong. This does not seem easy. Then they get to Yusuf, and of course, then you get the exposition about the sedative. And again, one way that this scene is done well is that it would be very easy for Christopher Nolan to just say, yeah, there's a sedative, it makes you go to sleep, and, for a long time, and it makes the dream really stable. And you're like, okay. But then you see an abuse of it, or uh, um, a use of it, depending on your frame of mind, because you see a bunch of people there in his basement that sleep for 4 hours every day, and it really makes them feel like they're in this dream world for 40 hours. And Sato's a little appalled. He's like, why do they do it? And then Cobb's like, well, after a while, it's really the only way you can dream, you know? When you're working in this world of being able to manipulate dreams, you can't actually relax to dream anymore. And then this elderly man says, they come to be woken up. The dream has become the reality. And who are you to say otherwise? So, in what could have been just a very normal, boring exposition scene about this technology, this chemical that they're going to have to use, Christopher Nolan manages to show you it in use, how it can get abused, and then make you even question if that's abuse. Maybe this is a better life for these people. And who are you to say what reality is real? What is real? It's very deep existential sort of question, very philosophical, and certainly makes what would be a dry exposition scene much more interesting. And it doesn't take a lot of extra time, too. That extra button on the scene is only a couple minutes, but look at how more powerful it makes that whole conversation land, where you see where it leads to. All right, so we have more exposition here. Ariadne is talking about the levels. Each levels is a different part of the subconscious and things like that, and it's a maze. And then we still have this tension, right? Because in case you bring Mal in, and that's why really Mal, like I said, is the antagonist. She is the character that's looming over everything. She might mess everything up. And in true in a fashion befitting of an excellent writer like Christopher Nolan, he keeps reminding you of her presence. She's constantly around. There's really not going to be too many scenes where characters are in the same room with her, relatively speaking, but she just looms over the whole piece because they're constantly worried about her, and there's a threat, and he's constantly bringing it back to that. And again, that brings us back to that motivating factor I said that's so important. So we get to the point where now we see that Cobb, the only way that he can dream is by putting himself into this chemical state, and in his dreams he's still together with Mal. And then Ariadne says, "Well, you shouldn't use memories," and he's like, "Nope, I shouldn't." And he hasn't really moved on from whatever situation happened between him and his wife, which we don't know yet what it was, but we're gonna find out in that scene. And we're going to find out that he originally implanted Inception in his wife's mind. Well, actually, we don't find that out until the very end. We find out at this point that his wife came back to reality, and she didn't accept it as reality, and she committed suicide thinking that it would wake her up from a dream state. So that's as much information as we have at this point. So we get into the big heist. It looks like, everything is on point. We've lined up all of the chess pieces, and now it's time to just set off those dominoes, right? That's really what this story is. The first half of it is just Christopher Nolan setting up dominoes, and then the last half is this beautiful, he knocks all those pieces over, and we just watch them boop, 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 and it's great. Again, brilliant piece of work to study for these sort of things. But what we have with the heist is immediately when they get in, well, first it's raining, which is a fun joke, because apparently if you need to use the restroom or you are using the restroom in your sleep, it's going to rain in in your dream, which is pretty funny. But then we have immediately they're faced with more security than they thought because their target was expecting them. So it's a huge battle, it's a huge action sequence, and one of them gets shot. And then we have this reveal that if one of them dies in this state, they're literally going to go into limbo, which is, as they say, nothing is down there except for whatever might have been left behind, whoever's sharing the dream who's been trapped there before, which in our case is just you, and that's speaking to Cobb. And of course, this is Arthur saying it. He's that opposition character, he's that skeptic, and he's going to be very much like, we're doomed. Oh, well, you know. And what great stakes, because Christopher Nolan had to figure out a way to make stakes, because here they are in a dream, and we established early on that, well, you just wake up if you die in a dream. Whoop-de-doo. Well, that's not very high stakes. Yes, you have the stakes of Cobb wanting to accomplish the mission for the sake of his children, but that didn't give the other characters that much stakes. Now we have all of them have stakes. If any of them dies, they might drop into limbo, which could mean their brain is just going to get scattered into a million pieces. They may never recover from it. Essentially, it's a fate worse than death. So, quite an excellent escalation of the stakes. And it's right off the get-go. They get that first level and then the escalation states. And of course, he's just going to keep layering them on because things are going to go wrong, things are going to go badly. You get to the point where they miss a kick and then they have to do this and that, and it just gets more and more complicated. He just raises. It's a combination of option lock and time lock because they constantly have this ticking clock. We only have so much time before because everything has to time up between these different levels. Very complicated, but they keep reminding you, and it keeps the audience going. So even if the audience, and I know a lot of people who saw this movie, loved this movie, didn't even fully understand it the first time, but they were able to track enough because they were able to track, okay, the mission's going well. I want this mission to succeed. I don't maybe understand every little nuance of what's going on because it's complicated, but I can follow it enough. So, yes, Ariadne says, Cobb says that the world was not real. No matter what I did, no matter what I said, she was convinced that we were still in a dream. So there was nothing that he could do to make her want to wake up. She would believe that the actual reality, well, depending on your viewpoint in the movie, actual reality was not, in fact, actual reality. But there are people that take the interpretation of this film that Ariadne is actually correct the whole time. You have options. And I think the fact that the movie makes them question that, the story makes them question that, is a testament to how well written it is. When it's a story about questioning reality and you make the audience question what is reality in the movie, brilliant. Great job. So, anyway, let's keep going. So here's the scene where the relationship character really comes through, Ariadne, and she explains, your guilt defines her, what powers her, but you are not responsible for the idea that destroyed her. And if we're going to succeed in this, you have to forgive yourself. And you're going to have to confront her, but you don't have to do it alone. It's a lot of very straightforward, let's do this, do this, do this, do this. And that's okay because this is a complicated story. You don't want that emotional linchpin to be complicated. It needs to be very clear to the audience. Okay, I get it. He has to forgive her. He's probably going to have to face off with her so he can, come to some sort of reconciliation. I can follow all this. Maybe all this other stuff, I'm not sure, but I can definitely follow this. And certainly from an emotional standpoint, it's pulling us through. Even more so than the fun and the excitement of all the special effects and the buildings being rotated and cars falling off of buildings and explosions. All that is fun, but it's that emotional connection that's pulling us through. So ultimately, we get to the end, and Cobb does face Mal, and she says, how did you know it was a lie? And Cobb said, it was my lie. And she said, oh, because you planted the idea in my mind. So he performed Inception on his wife to get her out of that limbo state. And when she came out of the limbo state, she wasn't able to shake that. As Cobb said at the beginning, an idea can infect you. It's like a virus. And once it's in your mind, you can't really get rid of it. So many great nuggets of thoughts, within this script. Really speaks to just a lot of different approaches to the topic. It'd be very easy to just do a fun, lighthearted romp in dreams where it's like, oh, it's like Ocean's 11 and they have to extract memory. And there's nothing wrong with that. That could be a fun popcorn film. But this really does strive for something more. It strives to be a conversation about reality, what determines reality, how do you accept what is real in your life, things like that. How do ideas get formed? What happens to ideas when they take hold? Obsession, things like that. So at the final end of the movie, we have Cobb approaching elderly Sato, and Sato says, "You come to convince me to honor our arrangement." And Cobb says, "Yes, to take a leap of faith, come back, and we'll be young together again." And so he agrees. They get themselves out of limbo, back to normal. Or do they? Because the totem was set up as a way that you could test if your dream if you're still in a dream or not. So everyone has this object that operates only the way that they would understand. Nobody else can fake it. And so Cobb's is a top that came from his wife, so he spins it, and it usually topples over. Well, at the end of the film, Christopher Nolan has the top spinning and it's starting to waver a little bit, and then it cuts, which leaves the audience to decide, well, is that top just going to keep spinning? Because is Cobb in not reality? But what I would say is what's even a better, well, not a better, but what makes the ending work so well is that you have left the audience with that question. Is Cobb, in fact, in reality or not? But you also have that Cobb is now not worried about it, right? He has accept whatever reality he is in, whether it's some sort of dream reality or reality, he's accepted it. He has moved on to his children. He's not even looking at the top. So he's at peace. And that was the biggest motivating factor for him. So even though we're not sure if he got what he wanted exactly, because at the beginning of the movie, it seems like what he wants is to be with his children in reality, we do know that for the characters, from the character's viewpoint, he's gotten what he needed, which is he has peace with the world and he has been reunited with his children. And again, it's that very basic human need, human desire, the desire for love and relationship and peace that motivates us throughout the story among all of the lengthy exposition and complicated world building and all of the things that Christopher Nolan has to do. It really could have turned into a complicated spaghetti mess, but he pulled it out because he set up he set up front all of those great character beats and gave us something clear to track. So that is its inception. I hope that you have learned a little bit about exposition, and I'm sure you might take another look at this film. Certainly worthwhile to do so. Like I said, especially for things like setting up plots, it really is great where it's just a bunch of setups and a bunch of payoffs and all of that. A way to make sure you get those character motivations across as well. If you want to join me some more this evening, we're going to be doing a book fight. And it's not going to be Treasure Island versus The Wizard of Oz there. That was last week. Although you can check the video of that. We're going to be doing Pride and Prejudice versus Emma. So which Jane Austen film is better? And if you have any questions or you'd like to pick my brain a little bit, maybe you like how I think, you can always join me on The Story Doctor. That is Sundays at 8 p.m. And you can join me live, ask me questions about your novel or something that you're working on or just writing in general, feel free to come in then and ask those questions. And you can either come in here on YouTube, subscribe and ring the bell so you get notified, or you can join us live here in our studio by going to autocrit.com/live and follow the meetings. You'll see a schedule there and they'll say join live. And if you join that live meeting, it means that you can appear on camera if you want, or on mic, and have a conversation with us live here in the studio. Other than that, thank you so much for joining me on this little adventure into this beautiful movie. I will see you again. Bye, everyone.